Something that a lot of people ask when they first start on board with the fitness journey is, do I have to weigh my food? Now, this isn't something that everyone needs to do, but it is a very useful tool in the arsenal to find out how much of something you're actually eating. There are people in the past who have done things like weigh their lettuce, weigh their cucumber, weigh their broccoli, which is pretty pointless in my opinion. If you're having a consistent amount of vegetables at every meal during the week, then you're pretty much good to go. You don't need to track it, you don't need to weigh it, because the amount of time you're to some extent digesting it with the fiber and everything like that basically ends up being neutral. So as long as you don't have crazy random intakes of vegetables, you're good to go. When it comes to weighing other things though, there are a couple of different techniques. Number one is weighing by volume. Rather than actually getting a scale out, using something like a cup or a handful or a palm to get an idea of how big or how much something is. A cup of rice will generally be between 40 and 50 grams of carbs on average, depending on what kind of rice you're using and how much water and all that kind of stuff. But my general rule of thumb is 1 cup of rice is about 40 to 50 grams of carbs. So if I use a cup, then I know exactly how much rice I'm getting every single time. And if I'm consistent with how I track it, then I don't need to bother weighing it because it's just 1 cup. A cup is a cup. You just use the same cup every single time and you're good to go. Same thing when you're looking at proteins. If you look at your palm is on average about 100 grams of protein, right? Depending on how thick the cut of meat is. But if you're looking at chicken, you're looking at beef, whatever, about a palm is about 100 grams when it's cooked. So you can use that, and then using the rule that a thumb is about, again, 15 grams or so, or a tablespoon or so of fat, then you can take a look at a meal if they're all separated out and get a good idea how much carbs, how much protein, and how much fat is in your meal. Most people will be doing something along those lines. They'll get to the point where they can eyeball it, but to get to that point, you need to sometimes weigh a few things. Sometimes you'll chuck something on the scale and you'll realize, hey, I've been over or under tracking that because I didn't actually know how much that weighed. Some things like cereals, popcorns, there's going to be a lot of things that are quite light. You can actually get a lot more out of rather than thinking, oh, I'm going to have this small bowl. Really, you could have 2 or 3 of those small bowls for 1 serving because the food is so light. On the same token, there are some foods that are a lot heavier than you expect, which is an experiment me and my wife did with nachos. The corn chips are actually a lot heavier than I expected. I decided to portion myself out what I thought was 1 serve of these corn chips was about 50 grams. And then I decided to weigh it to see how far off I was. And I was pretty far off. So I took it away and I ended up looking at it and ended up being like 1 chip was about 5 grams. So it was about 10 chips would get you a serving. But if I hadn't done that, I would have easily gone sort of 25, 50% over the amount that I was actually allocating for myself for the meal. And if you do that at 3 meals a day and you're doing that, 3 meals a day for 7 days a week, you're overestimating certain foods. Like it's not going to be as easy as just a slice of bread sometimes. You're going to have a bit of an idea of how much something's going to weigh. Now I know for future exactly how much each chip weighs, not so I can be anal about it, but just so I can have a better idea of how much I'm actually inputting. And if you're serious about hitting your goals and you're serious about achieving them, it's important to know that all of those little things add up, either for positive or for negative. Sometimes you end up overeating a little bit at each meal, and that adds up to either erasing or maybe going over your calorie deficit, so you end up in a calorie surplus. Then you gain weight and you're like, well, what am I even doing this for? But the problem is you're not eating as little as you think you're eating. The same thing can be said of something like peanut butter. Peanut butter is something where notoriously people will see a tablespoon and they'll grab a whole thing and go, and then this big, massive tablespoon ends up being like 30 grams, which is, again, twice the size of what a normal tablespoon is meant to be. These are foods that if you know that you're having a bit of trouble with them, or you're having things like this consistently where it's not a really clear serving size, at least once or twice, measure it, weigh it, have a look at, whoa, I didn't realize how little chicken that was or how much corn chips that was. So you can start to get a better idea of, well, maybe if I'm not getting results, I need to start dialing in my tracking, not forever. You don't have to start taking the scale with you everywhere you go to weigh every single thing that you do. That's not usually the scope of the goals of the people that we work with at the Fit Dads Club. But if you do have a couple of foods that you're not 100% sure you're tracking right, popping them on the scales every now and then will give you a lot of awareness as to how much of something you're actually eating. And it usually is a big indicator for people if they're like, oh, I'm eating 1,600 calories and I'm not losing weight and I'm going to the gym 3 times, 4 times a week. It's like, well, it sounds like you might not be tracking very effectively. Let's take a look and let's make sure that everything that you're inputting is reflective, because as much as it doesn't seem like a big change, going from 1 cup to 1.5 cups of rice, or 1 serve to 2 serves of corn chips, over time is really going to add up and it's going to eat into your deficit. That's going to have you feeling demotivated, so you're not going to be achieving your goals. So weighing is important. Now, there are times where I'll just take a meal, I'll get a rough approximation, and I'll be able to divide it. Something that you're never going to be able to weigh every individual ingredient of. For example, last night we made a carbonara. What I did was I took all of the ingredients and I decided I'm going to have roughly a quarter of this entire meal. So I'm going to take all the ingredients, track the entire thing as if I was eating everything, and I'm just going to track it as a quarter serve of that entire meal. And that gave me what is honestly the closest that you can get, because as much as we can try and weigh and track every single little thing, and it's important to get a bit of an idea of how much we're actually having, it's not sustainable for life. And you're not going to be able to know, oh, have I got exactly 1/4 of the amount of bacon bits or chicken that's in this pasta? Have I got exactly 1/4 of all of the noodles and all the pasta that's in there? Probably not. But it's a lot better than trying to track every single individual little thing. You got to give yourself a rough ballpark. Plus, a lot of packaging, a lot of foods have the calories written on them, and they've got a variance. There's a tolerance within how close to those numbers they can actually be. No two packets are going to be similar. No two foods are going to be similar. There's going to be all sorts of different reasons why you're able to absorb more or why there's less of one fat or carb or whatever in any food. So it's important not to get too caught up in those details. However, in the things we can control, such as our serving sizes, we want those to be as consistent as possible. So making sure that we know how much of everything we're having, that's what's going to give us an idea of, are we in a deficit or are we not, right? So if you're someone who's been tracking food, who's been logging it, who's been looking at it, and you're still not losing weight and you're still in what you think is a calorie deficit, maybe take a look at what are the foods you're having consistently. Are you tracking them all properly? Are you tracking them enough, right? If you're having too much of them, knowing that you're having too much of them is a very powerful tool. So have that awareness. Think, am I tracking it by volume? Is that going to make my life a lot easier? Knowing exactly how many grams 1 cup is and having that measurement saved so you know every time, all right, I have 1 cup of mashed potato, and I know that that ends up being, about 200 grams. So you can just really have that mental note in your head for foods you have consistently. This is another reason why we recommend consistent foods to people and having similar meals time and time again, because having the same meals means you get used to tracking certain meals, means you understand how many calories are in them. So if you started having different meals all the time, or maybe you've started something like HelloFresh, or you've just been introducing new meals, then that difference, if you're not tracking it properly, might be the difference as to why you're not progressing as far as you would like. So that is really, the pros and cons of weighing food. There's a mental toll that it takes as well that we've got to consider, which is not always the most healthy thing to be weighing every single thing we're eating. But I recommend, at least for things like carbs and some of your fat serves, making sure that you're weighing them. Things like cereal, oats, all very, very good for you to weigh, at least for a serve or two, to understand, this is how much of this I can have as a standard serve. Knowing that by eye, knowing that mentally will really allow you to dial in on your nutrition and know how much you're having, how much is going to be over your budget, and how much is going to cause you to lose weight and lose fat, which is the goal here. So if you want some more tips like this, let us know, comment below. Looking forward to seeing you on the next video. Till then, peace out.